Rafael, I'm pleased to tell you that we don't have to wait for your great-grandfather to smile. If you look at him, he's smiling right now, especially when the chicken started crowing a bit, he smiled. What he has told you about the importance of this giant of a man is an understatement. When this man died in 1896,
95.
the newspapers all published a very telling tale. More than 5,000 people went to his funeral. Tampa didn't have much more than 6,000 people. But everybody recognized that this man was a giant of industry, and he had brought industry, people, and money to this part of Florida, making this a very important industrial center. Vicente Martinez Ybor will go down as one of our super giants. Nobody has been able to compare the number of industries that have come to Tampa as a result of one single man and one particular industry. I want to take you back, as was correctly said in the introductory comments. Tampa was a little fishing village, some 750 people living. It wasn't even a city. This was called Tampa Town. And 3 Spaniards came here checking out this wilderness. This was nothing but a forest, some swamp. There was nothing here except a lot of trees. It was that vision that Rafael was describing, that this giant of a man transformed. That's a singular, important word for you to remember. Transformative experience that Tampa had with the arrival of Vicente Martinez Ybor. I keep calling him a giant. Really, he was no more than probably 5'6". He probably weighed somewhere around 160, maybe 165. But he was a very determined individual. As Rafael has said, he came to Tampa in his 60s. But with him came some young cigar manufacturers and a very determined civil engineer with them. Of course, Ignacio Aya was the competitor, but he was almost an adopted son of Vicente Martinez Ybor, because he used to seek advice from the old man. The old man always gave that advice, as Rafael has told us that he was willing to share. So the cigar manufacturer by the name of Ignacio Aya accompanied Vicente Martinez Ybor with that civil engineer who was living in New York by the name of Gavino Gutierrez. They came here and they looked around, and Martinez Ybor said, let's buy land here and let's get a cigar industry started here. And that is exactly what they did. It so happened by serendipity that it was 1884 and 1885 when another major industrial explosion was about to happen. And that was the arrival of the railroad. So these two factors, the cigar industry together with the railroad, really was a double header. And before you knew it, Henry Plant's railroad was transporting people here and shipping the cigar products that were being produced here. The railroad arrived, soon the streetcars arrived. Soon electric a company came to Tampa. Waterworks and sewers and street painting occurred. Telephone service just got started just before he died. At the time that he died, I told you, Tampa had about 6,000 residents. 5,000 of them all were at his funeral. He lived not far from here. From his home, the entire funeral procession started. There were 2 Jesuit priests that presided in that funeral. People galore were all lining the streets. The businesses had all closed down in honor of this one single giant that had transformed Tampa. Rafael talked about the credibility that his great-grandfather had with other cigar manufacturers, even though they were his competitors. They were in the same industry. They were producing beautiful, wonderful cigars that went all over the world, especially all over the United States. Let me give you some quick statistics as to what this man represented to the development of Tampa. Ybor and his buddy Ignacio Aya had such high credibility in the cigar industry throughout the Americas that in a 10-year period from 1886 to 1896, listen carefully, in a 10-year period, Mr. Ybor together with Mr. Aya brought 11 cigar factories from Key West. They brought 13 cigar factories from New York. They brought 5 cigar factories from Chicago. And they even brought 2 cigar factories from Havana, Cuba. So when you add 11 plus 13 plus 5 plus 2, every one of those cigar factories needed about 200 employees to produce the tobacco. But then you had the related and affiliated industries, such as cigar boxes, cigar labels, warehousing tobacco, shipping. Recently, they have changed the name of Channelside to Sparkman Channel, to the Sparkman area. And that was a personal friend of Mr. Ybor. The Sparkman boys were lawyers, and one of them ran for Congress, got elected, and thank God for Mr. Sparkman, he got the Corps of Engineers to dredge and dredge and dredge and dredge Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay became a major shipping port Today, the port of Tampa is the 7th most important port that we have, thanks to Mr. Sparkman and thanks to the cigar industry. Not only did they need workers to make the cigars, they needed carpenters, they needed painters, they needed plumbers, they needed people that would work to build those little homes that we now call las casitas. They would make these homes and they would sell them for $750. Nowhere could a cigar maker buy his own home and be a homeowner. But it was possible in Ybor City because Mr. Ybor and his friends financed not only the manufacture of the houses, but also they financed the purchase of small houses, medium houses, large houses, and a lot of the other related industries, hotels, rooming houses, restaurants, banks, cafes, bars, clothing stores, laundries, all related industries to keep people happy. And it all started from the first 40 acres of nothing but a forest. This was nothing but a swampy forest. And they were able to get an industry going. Let me quickly remind you that it was because of Martinez Ybor that we had his factory and the Sanchez and Aya factory, and quickly we had the Gonzalez and Mora, and we quickly had Lozano and Pendas, and we had Monet with this wood frame cigar factory that has just been transformed by Ariel Quintela. That was one of the buildings that went up when Mr. Ybor was alive and well. In fact, even Jose Marti visited that factory. But with those factories that I mentioned came Corral and Arango and Argüelles and Villafon, and of course we can't forget Mr. A.K. Wood. He was from Michigan, and when Martinez Ybor said that they needed carpenters and they needed equipment and material to build a city, he transferred his sawmill and lumber manufacturing right here to Tampa, and before you know it, cigar boxes were needed, and Mr. Wood produced not only the cigar factories for the Tampa factory, but also for the New York factories and even Cuban factories. The printing presses were very important. It was part of the marketing. How do we sell Tampa? The Germans were geniuses. They came to the cigar manufacturers and they said, let us put a label on the box. The Spaniards, of course, were distrusting. Why put a label? Because I'll put a nice looking lady's face on it and it'll be red, green, yellow, and people will be impressed by the lady that's smiling. Really? Let's see what it looks like. And lithography took over as the best marketing technique that they had in the cigar industry. Just think, if you walked up and you were going to buy a cigar, and a bunch of cigars that had no label, but just in a box, and then there was a box with a very attractive, colorful label, and then a band, a ring, as we used to call in Spanish, el anillo. Oh, let me have 3 of those. Do you want any of these? No, I like the one with the lady smiling. Great technique, and every box said, made in Tampa. Not only did Mr. Martinez Ybor get this industry going here, there was a very sharp lawyer on the other side of the Hillsborough River by the name of Hugh McFarland. And he said to his friends, if the Spaniards can do it on the East Bank, why don't we try to do it on the West Bank? And before you knew it, West Tampa was born. And together with Ybor City and West Tampa, they became the cigar capital, not just of the United States, but became the cigar capital of the world. Mr. Ybor, as Rafael has told you, made wise investments. He believed in Tampa. He believed that this place was going to be a big and very beneficial and profitable venture. So all of a sudden they created the Ybor City Land and Improvement Company. They created the first street railroad, narrow gauge, but the first transportation from downtown to Ybor City was Mr. Ybor's doing. And the gas company, as was mentioned, and then of course the birth of the Exchange National Bank and Florida Brewing. Florida Brewing, a tremendous industry right here that was producing enough beer, not just for Tampa and the neighboring cities and the neighboring state of Georgia, but shipping most of its beer down to Cuba. All the product of Martinez Ybor money and his partner Manrara, and both families operated the Florida Brewing. That building is still here. I'm glad to see that the owners of the building are here with us today as the representatives of their law firm. If you haven't been there, get Angela Rodante to give you a tour of that historic building. That was the famous Florida Brewery. In a short time, those 10 years of development, let me give you some quick statistics. In 1893, as an example, the Ybor City factories were producing 88,190,000 cigars.
Wow.
In West Tampa, we call that mucho cigars. That was in 1893. Those 88 million plus cigars sold for no less than $5,533,000. Fast forward to 1890, the cigar production was over 90,500,000. And by that 1900, the Tampa cigar production was close to 2 million annually. From Ybor City, working with Mr. Martinez Ybor and his associates, a number of political figures were elected. Charlie Miranda and I were commenting before this evening's program got started. Let me just tell you, the city councilman from Ybor City, Vincente Martinez Ybor's son, Candido, was elected to city council. The lector that was the reader in Martinez Ybor factory was elected. Ramon Rivero y Rivero. Ramon Rubiera de Armas, another one. Another partner of Martinez Ybor was cigar manufacturer Emilio Pons, who had a cigar factory with Candido Martinez Ybor, as well as Ignacio Aya himself got elected to city council. And their foreman, Adalberto Ramirez, was on city council representing this particular ward. And Manrara's son, Oscar, himself was elected to city council, and many more like Manuel Rodriguez, Alfonso Garcia, Rafael Peña, Jose González Elias, and Jose Gomez. These were early city councilmen who were related to the cigar industry. By 1888, Mr. and Mrs. Vicente Martinez Ybor had been invited to the elaborate ceremony taking place as the cornerstone was being laid at the Tampa Bay Hotel, which is what we now call the University of Tampa. In 1890, both Mr. and Mrs. Martinez Ybor were looking at in amazement at the cypress logs, the blocks of cypress that were laid in Tampa on Franklin Street as the first pavement of a street with cypress logs. We had a lot of trees. We could afford to have paving with cypress blocks. Then Mr. and Mrs. Martinez Ybor were invited to attend the grand opening of the Tampa Bay Hotel, when a lot of the rich and famous from throughout the United States came to Tampa. Tampa got its first telephone service provided by Southern Bell. Unfortunately, Martinez Ybor had died before we got to have telephone service. But they saw the new courthouse that resembled the architecture of the Tampa Bay Hotel, now the University of Tampa. And everybody in Tampa celebrated together with the Martinez Ybor family and friends when in 1893, one of the Tampa lawyers, one of the Tampa judges from Tampa got elected the first governor in the state of Florida from the Tampa area. We've got an elementary school named for him, Henry B. Mitchell Elementary. I told you that Jose Marti was a frequent traveler here, always took time to go in and visit and greet and give homage to El Viejo Martinez Ybor. Shortly before his death, I told you that the Florida Brewing Company was born. What a great history that building has left for us. As Rafael told you, Martinez Ybor had been married on 2 separate occasions. First married in Cuba, had a family, his wife died. He then had to come to the United States. There, he was avoiding the problems that they were having with the 10-year war. He not only traveled to Key West and set up a factory in Key West, he went to New York. In New York, he built such a large factory, 5-story cigar factory, and he called it El Coloso, which means the Colossus, the biggie. It was the biggest cigar factory ever, and it was one of the many brands that Martinez Ybor had. He died here in Ybor City in 1896. He had been suffering from a liver ailment, and he had to go to New York. They thought that it had been solved. He then came back to Ybor City. Unfortunately, happiness was not with him because he turned for the worse, and he passed away here, and everyone was in shock and everyone was in mourning. He was placed in a beautiful casket, the most beautiful casket that had ever been seen in Tampa. And when all would come into his living room to pay their respect to Mercedes de la Revilla de Martinez Ybor, his widow, They all looked with amazement. Right next to the coffin lay his favorite dog, Roby.
Ybor.
Roby. R-O-B-Y.
Ybor.
Flip it around,
Ybor.
it's Ybor spelt backwards. He even had a cigar label called Roby. So between El Príncipe de Gales, which means the Prince of Wales, El Coloso, Roby, La Flor, not the flower, but La Flor in Spanish means the best of Martinez Ybor, a huge legacy has been left. Charlie, the mayor of Tampa, was Mr. Gillette, and all of the mayor and all of the city council came together representing the city of Tampa. And from his home, not far from where we're speaking, they went down 11th Avenue to 14th, which is now República de Cuba. They came exactly in front of the cigar factory that now is the Scientologist. But that was the Martinez Ybor factory. And across the street where Gonzalez Clinic was, and later Don Vicente's Inn, that was the administrative offices that Mr. Martinez Ybor and his partners had for the development of Ybor City. The procession stopped there in honor and memory of the old man, the best benefactor that Tampa had ever had. They walked all the way to 7th Avenue, they took a right, and one block up on 13th, they stopped again because that was the site of the very first little cigar factory that had been built for Martinez Ybor, and he had given it to the Cuban workers, and they had called it El Liceo Cubano. The procession continued on 7th Avenue all the way to Morgan. In Morgan, they turned left, and the procession with people lined all on the street. Remember, all the businesses were closed, so everybody went out to pay their respect. The coffin was brought in to the Catholic section called the St. Louis section of the Oak Lawn Cemetery, where Rafael acknowledges where his great-grandfather has been laid to rest. The newspapers said that the procession was so long, it was 1.5 miles of people who were following the casket to show their respect and gratitude. So I leave you with this thought. On this 200th birthday of Vicente Martinez Ybor, I leave you with this thought. What if he had not existed? What if, instead of Tampa town, he would have selected Galveston or Mobile or maybe even Cedar Key? Tampa would not have developed into the great cosmopolitan area that it has developed. In closing, I want to share with you something that I picked up from Rafael, in case you're not aware. Rafael said that his mother's surname was Ybor, with an I. His father was Martinez. Why would somebody call him Ybor instead of Martinez? Well, when the Spaniards came to the United States, they always took the tradition, the paternal surname and the maternal surname, because you are a product of a man and a woman. So this rightfully would have been Martinez City. Bob Martinez would have probably liked that, but the Americans that did not know the two or double surname tradition would look at the last, and the last was 4 letters, and they would call him at first Mr. Ybor.
Ybor, Ybor,
Ybor.
Ybor.
And Mr. Martinez Ybor would say, no, 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 no.
It's Ybor.
So he decided, let's change that I
To the O.
and let's put a Y. And as a result, we've got
Ybor.
Ybor City with a Y and not Marti City. Join me as I say, happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday.
Thank you, Your Honor.